Vivek Ramaswamy's super PAC recently debuted this billboard in Times Square. Look at this. The ad tears into Mamdani with radical socialists and urges New Yorkers to flee to Ohio. Ramaswamy is the GOP candidate for governor of Ohio, and he's in focus now. Great to see you, Vivek. First of all, I mean, having him go to Capitol Hill today, your reaction to that?
Well, look, the question is, where does the Democratic Party go from here? Do they go a direction that's much more moderate, sensible, even if they disagree with us on certain policies? Or do they go the direction of a socialist party in the United States of America? That's a choice for them to make. But my own view, Harris, is that capitalism is the greatest system known to the history of man to lift people up from poverty. And we on the Republican side ought to embrace that rather than apologize for it. One of the things that Mamdani has said in New York is that he wants to eliminate billionaires, or that billionaires shouldn't exist. My view is a little bit different. The question we should be asking is, how does every American child born in this country able to enjoy the most important things that billionaires do? Access to a world-class education, the American dream, a place where we actually celebrate success rather than to villainize it. That's my vision for the future of our state, for our country. That's where the Republican Party, I hope, is headed. And the Democrats are lost in the wilderness, but we'll see where their chips end up landing, whether it's in the socialist lane that he's taken New York City.
Look, Vivek, I know a big part of what you talk about, too, is public safety. I mean, it's not just in our vernacular right now. It's part of life after an open border for 4 years with millions of people coming in that we couldn't vet. But it also means more protection and law enforcement, too. I want to take a closer look at some of Zohran Mamdani's agenda. He has several social media posts from him calling to decarcerate criminals being held in New York City. Mamdani's campaign website says he'll ensure our immigrant New Yorkers are protected by strengthening our sanctuary city apparatus, getting ICE out of all city facilities and ending any cooperation, increasing legal support, and protecting all personal data. He is also clear about what he thinks about the city's wealthiest. As Vivek, you just pointed out. Let's listen and watch here.
Do you think that billionaires have a right to exist?
I don't think that we should have billionaires because, frankly, it is so much money in a moment of such inequality. I look forward to work with everyone, including billionaires, to make a city that is fairer for all of them.
So you won't have that tax revenue from billionaires. You won't have the dreamers who employ so many people. I mean, what is he going to run, an encampment of people who are unhappier than they are now?
Well, look, the fact of the matter is that New York City actually used to be the place where the most successful people around the planet and around the country actually gravitated. I was one of those people, Harris. I grew up in Ohio. I went to Harvard for college. But when I graduated, I went to a New York City that was the seat of positive ambition and success and achievement in America. Sadly, that New York City is now behind us with de Blasio, now maybe with Mamdani completing the curve. But it also shows in the country that local and state leadership actually does matter. And on a positive note, Harris, this is what makes America great, is that you could still move. I mean, we have mobile citizens across the country. People have left New York in droves. That's part of why I'm running for governor of Ohio, is that I think we need new homes in the heart of the country that celebrate that spirit of ambition. That's exactly what's going to happen in New York City if a guy like this becomes mayor. But the beauty is in the United States, there are still going to be other places, including like my home state of Ohio that I'm going to lead, where people can actually head to still celebrate that American spirit. That's what I want to see. And on the rule of law, which you brought up, that's something that unites us as Americans. I don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican. Most people in this country don't want crime on the streets, don't want the abandonment of the rule of law with crime and property theft. Most Americans agree on that. That's actually something that unites us. And I think, for example, us in the Republican Party, we can do an even better job of celebrating that in a positive way to make this crazy Mamdani-esque left-wing vision for New York City seem like the fringe that it is.
Look, you know, I used to think when politicians said, come to my state, that maybe people wouldn't go. But look at California. I mean, people are leaving in droves. So I get it. And Ohio is a beautiful place. You know, I'm a fan. You know what? Let's talk about what Mamdani has just said in just the last 24 hours. That he will no longer say the words globalize the intifada. Wouldn't say he didn't believe them, wouldn't be challenged on that, but that he would discourage other people from saying it. And so now he met with some of the richest people in the city, business people in the city yesterday. He's on Capitol Hill today, supposed to meet with more business leaders as well. What's your take on his point of view, his radicalized socialism? The president says he's communist, not too far from that if you're reading the definition. What's your take on if this spreads to other cities?
Yeah, look, I don't know him in particular, but what I will do is speak about the broader ideology. There's two competing visions for the future of the country. One is a vision where we celebrate success and we embrace it. The alternative vision is one where we penalize success and celebrate victimhood instead. That's the direction that sadly the country has gone for so much of the last 4+ years. That being said, we have an opportunity to choose a different vision. And I do think that the fact that he's the Democratic frontrunner, the Democratic nominee now in New York, is actually helpful to the country to see that contrast. Because historically, what you might have is Democrats talking out of two sides of their mouth, confounding that vision. Frankly, I think we now have an opportunity to see a stark choice and leave it to the people, not just in 2025 in New York, but in 2026 across the country. This is what the 2026 midterms are going to be about. It's a fork in the road for the future of the country. And if you want to turn achievement into something that you distribute, if you want to turn success into something that you villainize, great. The Democrats and Mamdani, they've paved that path. The voters deserve that choice. I don't think that's the choice that most voters are going to go for. And you mark my words, Harris, right now, if he wins this, and I think he probably will in New York City right now, that is going to be the defining rift for the 2026 midterms.
Well, look,
and for my part, I'm looking forward to it.
Let's speak to the voters, because they're the people who matter in this equation. And we don't know if the primary really reflects what's going to happen in a bigger election here for mayor in New York City. The Faulkner Focus often goes to the streets of New York City. We sometimes can get people who've come from far away. This time we wanted to talk with New Yorkers to ask them what they think about Mamdani's socialist policies. Because if you think he can win, let's see what the people say.
I just think Mamdani would be terrible for the city.
I don't support him.
Not a fan.
That's not what we want for New York, do we?
I think it's too radical. He's an idiot.
He thinks he's going to give everything free. Where's the money going to come from?
Everyone always has to make money.
Government-run grocery stores, that's ridiculous. That's what they do in communist countries.
Well, I go for private industry. So if that's a choice, okay. I wouldn't want it to be the only choice.
It would implode the city.
I'm hoping for a miracle. Someone else, Eric Adams or someone wins.
A miracle. And I want to say we did get a number of people, too, who were not from the city. A lot of people talking about this everywhere. What do you say to voters? Is there any danger of a guy like Mamdani? Is he dangerous? I mean, we know he won't deny what he thinks about the globalized intifada. So I don't know how he reaches out to the nearly 1 million Jewish citizens in this city, but your thoughts?
Well, look, obviously there's going to be a selection bias on the kinds of people that would participate in that kind of interview. And if you look at the polling on the other end, he is at #1. So I take the positive side of this, Harris, for the longer run. I love New York City. Frankly, it's a city where I spent nearly a decade of my life. It's America's leading metropolis, and it would be sad to see New York head in a socialist direction. On the other hand, there's the bright side. I'm running to lead states like Ohio back to greatness. And so for America, I think there's a real positive in this, is this sets up a choice, answering the question of who we really are as Americans. Are we a people who celebrate achievement? Are we a people who are ambitious, who celebrate and embrace free enterprise and capitalism? I believe that's who we are. That's how we made America great the first time. Or are we the direction of a socialist version of a prior era of Europe? That's a stark choice ahead, and I personally believe it is a positive to put that up as a clear choice, a defining question, a litmus test for who we are as a country, who the Republican Party is, who the Democratic Party is. So we're not just doing politics by vibe anymore, but we're actually doing politics on the basis of serious policy differences. I think that's positive for America, as long as we have a culture of free speech and open debate, to be able to debate those differences respectfully and in the open. I don't think that this is necessarily as frightening as we make it out to be. I think it could actually be positive.
People have to vote. The party is going to play. They got to step up with their guy. If it's going to be at Eric Adams, he's not polling very well right now, so they're going to have to step up with that guy. If it's going to be Andrew Cuomo, he just lost to Mamdani. I mean, so you've got to do something if you're really serious about it, and that something is get people to vote. Vivek, it is always great to talk to you. Thank you so very much, and good luck in Ohio.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.